Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Brand Marks the Spot, a show where we talk about all things branding and design for online entrepreneurs to help you get your message and your business out into the world and impact more people. Welcome to another episode, as I said. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about the ever elusive brand colors and how to discover them. So, we're going to dive into that. And before we do, I just want to say that this episode is brought to you by my brand roadmap. And what this thing is a document that highlights all of the facets of your brand. And you can actually use it as a tool to help audit your own brand to see where there are gaps that you can fill. And it kind of goes over all the individual components and explains what they do and how to implement them into your business. So you can grab that at patricksesko.com/brand roadmap. So let's get on with the episode. Let's see here. Just making sure I'm live as usual, and it appears that I am. So if you have any questions, go ahead, leave a comment, and I will answer it live. Otherwise, leave a hashtag replay, ask your question, and I'll definitely come back to it and answer your question there. And I'll put that link up here on the screen if you are watching the video. And if you're not, the URL for that brand roadmap is patricksesko.com/brand roadmap. So let me get a sip of my coffee here. The nectar of the gods, of course. Anyway, so brand colors, right? This is one of the things that I get from other entrepreneurs that they always have trouble with, or they'll select their colors and they're just not right, or they look bad, or they don't work well together, and all of those things. But before we get into that, I just want to say, excuse me, color is obviously a very powerful tool in your branding arsenal, and it is often either overlooked or just not really done. It's not, your brand colors aren't chosen with any kind of like strategy behind it. It's like, oh, I like pink and I'm going to use pink. And that can work. There's definitely strategy and psychology behind color choices, and there's also a level of subjectivity as well. So it's kind of a combination, and it's definitely an art form on how to pick those right colors for you. So as I say, color is very powerful because of that, and it can have meanings, and it can have different meanings in different contexts and different situations, right? Even in different cultures, certain colors mean different things, right? And color can obviously evoke emotion and influence behavior. And it could even do things, physiological to you. So like, for instance, there's no coincidence that fast food restaurants will often use red and yellows in their branding. You look at McDonald's, Burger King, Red Robin, In-N-Out, most of them use red and yellows. And the reason that is because those colors actually will stimulate your appetite. It can actually cause you to salivate. So it's no surprise that they use those colors throughout their branding. So that's, as you can see, color is very powerful. And another reason why color is very powerful is because we process visuals like 60,000 times faster than we do when we're reading text, because we instantly get them. It hits those neurotransmitters in the brain, and it causes us to create those associations. And, when you think of, Target, you instantly think red. When you think of Tiffany, you instantly think of that Tiffany blue. And now that doesn't happen just overnight. Obviously, there's millions of dollars that have been invested into branding and marketing and all that. But over time, those colors become synonymous with those brands, and they sort of own the color in their space. So that's another reason why color can be so powerful. Another one is, UPS. What can brown do for you? They even use the color in their slogan. So, so it's very, very powerful. So what I do, and I do this in my workshop, I have a Nail Your Brand Colors and workshop that I do for entrepreneurs like you, that how we arrive at those colors is we usually end up looking at the strategy part of our branding, right? And this is all the stuff that we do long before the sexy part of your logo and design and all the cool stuff. It's the strategy stuff that we do in the discover phase, and you'll learn that in the brand roadmap. But, we look at our core values. What do we stand for? What are the things that are important to us? Why does our business exist? And when you look at those things and kind of journal those out, you can start to see some of the things that are important to you. Other things that we can look at are what our audience is going to be more attracted to. What kind of values does the audience have? Do they align with yours? What would they come to expect from you from a visual standpoint and colors? What kind of colors would resonate with them? Again, this is some trial and error. This is not like a mathematical thing where you plug into things and boom, this is your color. But there's a method that I will use, and I'll show you here in a moment on how to arrive at your brand colors. So think about that. And another thing that I also use, and this is one of the things I use most, especially with personal brands, is I use personality. So in the brand roadmap, in that discover phase, which is that research or the brand strategy phase, we go into discovering like your brand personality. And there are several ways of doing that. And I will just pop on a little slide here. So when you're doing things, when you're trying to discover your brand personality, you might have heard of a Myers-Briggs or Carl Jung's archetypes or Enneagrams. And these are all sort of these online quizzes that you can take, and that will sort of spit out these sort of personality traits. And they're very powerful to use in your branding, because in personal branding, particularly, people are going to be attracted to you, your personality, because you are the face of the brand. Now, business brands like a Target or a Walmart or whatever, they can have sort of, personalities, but their businesses are more personified. You look at Geico and even thing like Harley Davidson has sort of like a rebel personality, and Geico has that sort of jester, sort of funny personality, because their commercials are just, really iconic. Again, over time and lots of money, but we can use these same strategies on our smaller scale audience, right? So Myers-Briggs is one. Carl Jung's archetypes is widely used in branding, and there's 12 different sort of these archetypes, if you will, these personalities that have certain traits that should show up in your business consistently, in your visuals, and how you speak, how you write, the types of offers you put out, the types of how you like interact with your audience, your customer service. All of these things should permeate your personality, should permeate all of these things throughout your brand. So like I said, I focus on brand personality, and we can dive into some of those things when we were doing the one-on-one workshops and things like that. But for today, a simple way to arrive at your brand colors is to use your personality, because if you're a personal brand, your personality is going to be one of the things that are mostly in the forefront of your business. You're most likely going to be the face of your brand. You're going to have photos of you in action on your website and all of your PDFs and everything else that you put out there. So what I do to simplify it, especially when you're first starting out, because before I dive into that, there's sort of, branding is a process. It's not like I'm going to design the next Nike and I'm going to be huge. Now, it's okay to aspire to that, but you don't just get there. You arrive there by going through certain levels. And when you're starting out foundationally with your brand, it's easiest to just go ahead and choose your personality traits. So make a list of as many possible personality traits that would represent you. And you can ask yourself questions like, how would my friends describe me? How do my friends and family describe me? What are my strengths? What type of person would I be? What type of person am I? What are my core values? What's important to me? Is it integrity? Is it, comedy? Do you fun and wacky? Those kinds of things. Incorporate those. Make a list as many as you can. And it kind of goes without saying, obviously, you want positive traits. You don't want, cranky and, cranky old man or something like that, unless that's kind of what you're going for. But yeah, so write down as many brand personality traits as you can that are positive, because, we want to have positive influence on our audience. And then go through those and narrow it down to your top 3 to 5. And when we're branding our businesses, that personality is going to be sort of represented in many different facets of your brand. It's going to be represented in your colors. It's going to be represented in your fonts, your photography, your brand voice, which I did another episode on a couple of weeks ago about your brand voice. Just the way you interact with your audience, all of those things. So don't put too much pressure on the role of color in in displaying your personality. It's important to have that, but it's one facet. So narrow down to like 3 to 5 top personality traits that you want to be represented in your color. And then what you're going to do is you're going to end up mapping that personality trait to a color. And I go through this in great detail in my colors and fonts workshop. But just to give you an idea, you want to map those most desirable personality traits to a color that has a corresponding trait. Now, in my brand colors and fonts workshop, I go through all of this sort of, it's not an exhaustive list, but like each one of these colors have meaning and they have symbolism. So take those top 3 personality traits and map them to a color, and you might get the same color for each 3, or you might get a combination of colors, and then you just want to hold on to those in your back pocket. And then I'll kind of tell you how to build that color palette out. So when you're building a color palette, another reason why people struggle with this too is because they think that they need to have all of these different colors, and they think that they have to have equal amounts of all of these colors. But the reality is that because color is so powerful, the more the less you use the color, the more powerful it becomes. And when you're building out a color palette, you want to have that main anchor color, I call it, which we just talked about. And then you want to build a color palette based off of that main color palette. And I'll show you some techniques or some color models that you can use to do that. But the most important colors aren't really necessarily colors per se. They're more the neutrals that are going to permeate the majority of your designs, your web pages, your PDFs. And that's going to be your whites, your blacks, your grays, and just the subdued or the off-whites, or maybe just a tone of a certain color that's a neutral. So that way you're not just so much color in your face. Now you can do that in certain sections, like, the header section of your website, you can have a big swath of color. But if your whole website was, bright yellow and it's too much. So you got to have that contrast. So those neutrals are super important, and you're going to use those neutrals, 60 to 70% of the time in everything you do. So like a web page is going to be 60 to 70% of those neutrals. And then your anchor color is going to be like that 30%, 20 to 30%. And then you're going to have what they call accent colors or call to action colors, which are going to be a brighter sort of contrasting color to your anchor color that you're going to use for things like call outs, buttons, and things like that. So those are all going to be used around 10% of the time. And, it's kind of known as like the 60-30-10 rule: 60% neutrals, 30% your main brand color or colors, and then your accent color. So when you have decided on your main brand color, and you might have to do this exercise a few times to see what works, because again, some of this is subjective. You have to like it, obviously. And you also want to think too, like I'm using this, this is a pretty crazy example, but if you're like, say, a funeral home director or something like that, you probably, and you love pink, right? But you probably would not want to use bright pink in your website or any of your branding, because it just kind of would sort of turn people off. Now, maybe that's your differentiator. It's not outside of the realm of possibilities, but most people probably would not be, attracted to a funeral home that's got bright pink and, wacky kind of personality to it. So, think about those things. Again, what we're talking about here is more personal branding. So you are a coach, a consultant, a course creator, service provider. You're the face of the brand. Pick your personality traits, map those to a color that sort of represents that main personality traits. And then you're going to use a color scheme to sort of build a palette around that. And I'm going to show you what these are. There's 6 of them. And again, I go through this in my colors and fonts workshop. And actually, if you want to get on the waiting list for that, you can go to patricksesko.com/workshop. And I'm going to be running that again, hopefully in the summer. I don't have exact dates, but get on the list there so you can be notified. But there are basically 6 color schemes that you can try out. And so let's say in this case, the yellow is sort of the primary color, but you have 6. They're monochromatic, analogous, complementary, split complementary, triadic, and tetradic. Now, the top 3 there, monochromatic, analogous, and complementary, are probably the most common ones. As you get into those other ones, they become more complex, a little bit more difficult to work with. So if you're just starting out, I suggest you stick with one of those top 3. But in the monochromatic, it goes that, you select that main brand color, and you are going to only use that one color with tints and shades of that one color. And of course, always incorporating either blacks, grays, or whites as your neutrals. Now that a tint is when you add white to a color. So you're going to move towards like the pastels on the color wheel. And a shade is when you add black to the color. So it's going to be more subdued, a darker tone of that color. So monochromatic is great because it is like guaranteed to work because it's only the one color with tints and shades, and of course your neutrals. Now, when you move into the analogous, this is when you have, 2 to 3 colors that are adjacent to each other on the color wheel, and that can be anywhere on the color wheel. And if you look at my branding is actually an analogous color palette, but more on the blue, purple, violet side, or blue, purple, pink side. And again, you pick that sort of area on the color wheel. So if your main brand color is green, then maybe you'd stay with the lime green to the yellow, or you can go green, turquoise, and blue. So those typically will have, those are cooler. But then as you move over, let's say you do red is one of your main colors, and you want to do, purple and orange, that will all land in the analogous. Next up is the complementary color scheme, which is when you have 2 colors that are directly opposite on the color wheel. Now, this is a great one because those complementary colors inherently have a lot of contrast. So it's really great for one as a brand color and one as like an accent color. You look at, the Hulk is going to be that like sort of lime green and purple. You look at Christmas, it's green and red. Another popular combination, complementary color combination, is blue and orange. So you get the idea there. And then the others are split complementary, which is like the complementary, but you're basically using 2 colors that are next to the opposite color. Then you have triadic, which is 3 colors that are equally distant on the color wheel. And then, of course, tetradic, which is, again, more complex because you're incorporating more color, plus your tints and shades, and then plus your neutrals. It can get very confusing and very complex to use. And you have to really, train yourself not to overuse these colors because they are so powerful. Brands like Google and Microsoft use the tetradic color scheme. So they obviously have a big budget and branding budget and all that kind of stuff to work with their stuff. But again, stick with those top 3 and you can definitely not go wrong. Now, when you're choosing your colors, think about, the mood or the tone you want to convey. So if you're a upbeat, wacky personality, you might want some really bright, vibrant colors. And when I say bright, vibrant, I'm talking about their more saturated logos, like a bright red or a bright blue. But if you're doing something, you're a yoga coach or a life coach or something like that, and you want to have something that's a little more calming, you would add some tints to those logos, and those will be more on the pastel side. So they evoke a more calmer emotion, if you will, right? Calmer tone. So not all brands are going to be high value, high intensity colors. A lot of them are going to be really subdued, and the colors might be very subtle. So you want to think about that when you're doing that. And then when you are building out your color palettes, you can use tools like one of my favorites is Coolors, COOLORS.co, which is a color palette research and building tool. I'll do a whole nother tutorial on how to use that in another episode. And I also cover that in my Nail Your Brand Colors and Fonts workshop. And then you can use things like Canva, but then there's also places that you could research colors like your Pinterest or even Google. All of those things you can research and get some ideas. Again, inspiration, not imitation. You don't want to copy exactly. I did a whole nother episode on inspiration versus uh, uh, imitation. So think about that when you're doing it, and experiment. Open up a Canva doc or open up a Google Slides doc. Just open up any document in a software that you use that you can create shapes like circles or squares and add colors to them. And then you can play with your colors, right? See what they look like with text on top of them. See what they look like together. See what they look like in different ratios, that 60-30-10 ratio, right? And then play with that. And that's how you build a color palette. So once you get a couple of options, put it into context. Create, what does it look like on your web page? What will it look like in a social media graphic? Again, using the rule or the guideline, if you will, of the 60-30-10. And then I think you'll find that when you sort of apply the guidelines of these color schemes, and then you apply that 60-30-10 rule guideline. I hate to say rule because rules are meant to be broken, but guideline. And then you can really start to get a feel for what your colors are going to sort of represent and how your audience is going to receive them. So that's what I got for you today. Hopefully that was helpful. Let's see if we have any comments. If you got any comments, hit them up live. If not, just do a hashtag replay. Drop me a comment. I'll be happy to respond. And that's it for today. We'll see you next week. And you have a good rest of the week. Talk soon. Later.